Good day and welcome to Predators Proclivity, the show where we look at data from the season for the NHL Nashville Predators and make comments upon it. I'm your host, Preston Proctor, and it's tax day here in the U.S. I hope you've got your taxes filled out, sent in. I hope you didn't owe too much. Hope you didn't get too much back. That's the way I like to look at things. I'd prefer to send them money than have them holding onto my money for too long. So that's just the way I look at it. But anyway, you're not here because this is not a show on tax advice. This is a discussion of the Nashville Predators and their season. And what do we have? Well, we have the last game of the year tonight against Pittsburgh Penguins. A lot of games with playoff implications over the weekend. Of course, you know, the Preds played Friday and Saturday, beating the Blackhawks in Chicago and then winning against the Blue Jackets on Saturday at home. Most of the teams that are vying for playoff spots were in action. The Preds wound up 2-0 over the weekend, and so did Vegas. Vegas wound up 2-0. The team that they are mainly looking at are the Kings, who were 1-0. The Stars were also 1-0, as were the Jets and the Canucks. The Oilers had a bad weekend. The Oilers had a chance to take the division win, or still do, but going 0-1-1 over the weekend did not help them in their cause at all, especially the loss being to Vancouver. If you want to beat a team in the division, it's handy if you beat them on the ice. So, okay, I'm still a little under the weather. I apologize. I'm going to be a little raspy. I've got something to drink here. Non-alcoholic, don't worry. But I'll be a little distracted a little bit. Sorry about that. Okie dokie. So not a good weekend for the Oilers or the Avalanche. The Avalanche went 0-2. The Avalanche are in a battle with the Jets, not looking as much like a battle as it had for the second spot. They are a point behind them, and Winnipeg has 2 games to Colorado's 1. Anybody can lose. The Avalanche lost 2 over the weekend. Excuse me. So, that's, when they were beaten by the Jets on Saturday, again, that's the Jets held. I mean, one of the teams had to win, right? The Jets trying to overtake Colorado. They beat Colorado. That's how you do it. Colorado managed to lose to the Jets and lose to Vegas, so lost to 2 playoff teams this weekend. Good luck heading into the playoffs playing like that, but that's what they did. So that's the Western Conference, and in the Eastern Conference, Carolina went 2-0, Rangers went 1-0, the Panthers 1-0, Flyers, Caps, Bruins, Red Wings all went 1-0. The Lightning, Maple Leafs, Pens, and Islanders all lost. There's a big fight for the big fight. There's the third playoff spot in the Metropolitan is still up for grabs, kind of. With the Islanders have it, but the teams trying to get it are the Caps, Flyers, and Penguins. And, the Caps did win over the weekend, but the Penguins lost. So there you go with that. The Hurricanes are still 1 point behind the Rangers. The President's Cup is also a little bit of up in the air. We've got the Rangers at 112 points and Carolina and Dallas 1 point behind them. They all have 1 game remaining, so if the Rangers win their game, they've got it. If they don't, or if they get an overtime loss. It could go either way. Carolina does have the regulation win advantage of the 3. They're very distinct. That's not going to change with one game remaining. Carolina at 44, New York at 42, and Dallas at 40. So if it comes down to a tie between Carolina and New York, Carolina has the edge. I assume that goes for the President's Cup too. If you win your division, win your league, then you ought to, the guy finishing behind you shouldn't win the President's Cup. It is, the NHL, but both of those are Eastern Conference teams. I've done a little bit more work on my statistics on teams and who gets to win awards in the NHL, and that's going to be coming soon. I am seeing data that fully supports my opinion that the Eastern Conference is biased or gets biased by the media in the awards. Not to give everything away, but some awards are objective, like the President's Cup, scoring the most goals, that kind of thing. And then the rest of them are who somebody thinks is the most important person on their team or who's the best defenseman. And the Eastern Conference teams win a higher percentage of the objective awards than they do the subjective awards. I've ruled a couple of things out, like again, I'll get to this later, but like the Stanley Cup and the Conn Smythe Trophy, I took out of that because you can still be the most valuable player to your team and not win the President's Cup. That's fine, or not win the Stanley Cup. That's fine. You can't really hold that against them. I'll give you another little preview. Connor McDavid has won more awards personally than some teams have in their entire history, and they have the opportunity to win every award because if the player on their team wins an award, then that team gets credit for that award. But Connor McDavid by himself, not just Edmonton, but Connor McDavid by himself has won more awards than about 6 or 7 teams in the league. Now, granted, Vegas and the Kraken haven't been around that long, but some of the teams have been out there longer. Anyway, what else can I say about that? Nothing, because this is supposed to be about the Preds. Everybody's out there going, oh, well, maybe, Yossi can win the James Norris Trophy, best defenseman. Yeah, he can. He can. He's got some good stats. Plays in the Western Conference. The advantage is he does play in the Central Time Zone, so the media doesn't have to stay up too late to watch Predators games. Chicago also is another team. They're one of the original 6, but there was original 6. I think so. Again, I get into that in the next podcast. But they get plenty of awards themselves. But anyway, so that's a little bit of wrap up on the playoff standings. Boston and Florida are separated by 1 point for the top of the Atlantic. Boston 1 point ahead, but they have 2 games left. Florida only has 1. Toronto's solidly in the 3rd spot. Tampa Bay is solidly in the first wild card spot. Those are the 4 teams from the Atlantic. Detroit still could get into the playoffs through the 2nd wild card spot. New York and Carolina, 1 point separating them, 1 game left for both of them, top of the Metropolitan. 3rd being the Islanders, who probably are going to get that spot. They're 3 points up. Some teams have 2 games left, but 3 points. The Islanders, I think they lost over the weekend, which doesn't help their case, but the other teams are still 3 points behind them. The Caps are currently in the 2nd wildcard position with Detroit and Philadelphia, tied in points Detroit and Washington both have 2 games remaining. Philadelphia only has 1. Pittsburgh also has 2. They are 1 point out. So there are 4 teams, with 3 teams tied at 87, and one more team 1 point behind. That there's definitely some fighting going on. And then as far as regulation win advantage, Pittsburgh, who is a point behind, actually has the advantage over Washington and Philadelphia by 1 and by 4 over Detroit. If it goes to the regulation overtime wins, the Detroit Red Wings actually have the highest total of those teams at 37. That's not going to change with 2 games left. I'm not making any predictions on that. I haven't looked to see. I didn't look to see lately who the teams were playing. Although Pittsburgh, the team with 2 games remaining, just like Washington, 1 point behind them, are hosting the Nashville Predators tonight. Aha! How's that for a segue? Better start talking about the Predators soon, or I'll have to rename the podcast. So yes, tonight the Nashville Predators are on the road, and they are in Pittsburgh to play the Penguins. Nobody else is going to come to Pittsburgh to play Nashville, so I guess they'll be playing the Pittsburgh Penguins. That was funny in my mind. Okay. I promise I am not on any drugs. But anyway, so the Pittsburgh Penguins are 37, 31, and 12. Well, I've got a lot of overtime losses. At home, they are 22, 14, and 4. So a decent home team. They are 5th in the Metropolitan Division with 86 points, 4 points behind the 3rd place Islanders, and a point behind Washington and Philadelphia. I already talked about the Rangers and Carolina, and the Penguins are 1 point out of the 2nd wildcard spot. They are 10 points behind first wildcard spot, Tampa Bay. So that Tampa Bay will have the first wildcard spot. That is sewn up. The third. Who's going to win the divisions are still up in the air, kind of. In the Eastern Conference, they're still in question. Nobody's secured it yet, as opposed to in the Western Conference. But the Penguins play in the Eastern Conference, so they are still. Well, they probably. Well, Islanders really do look like they've got 3rd place side up. So the Pittsburgh's not likely. 2 games left. They're 4 points behind. They do have the regulation win advantage over the Islanders. And assuming that they were to win their last 2 and Islanders were not, and the other teams wound up in a tie with them, Pittsburgh would have the advantage, the tie break with those teams. I don't see that situation happening. Islanders just need to get 1 point, and they're pretty much the 3rd place team in the Metropolitan. But Pittsburgh could be the 2nd wildcard team, so they have a lot to play for. The Pittsburgh is 7-3 in their last 10 games. They did lose their last game Saturday against Boston in Pittsburgh. Tonight's game is the last of a 3-game homestand for the Penguins. They did lose against Boston. They won their other game. They have one more game after tonight. They play the Islanders Wednesday. The Islanders on Wednesday. Heading into the trade deadline, the Penguins did make 3 trades. They traded with Florida, the New York Rangers, and Carolina. So given the trading and who they were trading with, looks kind of like they didn't expect to make the playoffs. Just the 10 teams tend to either try to get better or sell their players to teams that are going to make the playoffs. Florida, Carolina, and the Rangers were looking pretty good the whole time. They traded with Florida. They traded goaltender Magnus Hellberg. People may remember that Hellberg was Nashville's number 2 or second round draft in 2011. He was the 38th pick overall in the 2011 draft by Nashville. Pittsburgh traded him to Florida for goalie Ludovic Weber. Weber is a minor league player. Hellberg, I do not believe, is. And that they got Pittsburgh got the minor league goaltender and a conditional 7th round pick in 2025. The condition is that if Hellberg plays in 2 or more NHL games for the Penguins, they get the pick. He hasn't yet done that this year, so it may just wind up in the Pittsburgh if they don't. They only have 2 games left. If he's not playing tonight, and they don't make the playoffs, it's just a trading of goaltenders. Against the Rangers, they traded defenseman Chad Rubital. That's what I'm going to stick with, for a 4th round pick in 2027. And then with Carolina, they traded forward Jake Gunsel and defenseman Ty Smith. 4. All right. This 4. Forward Michael Bunting, forward prospect Vasily Panamares, forward prospect Ville Koivunen, and the rights to forward Cruz Lucius. And they got a couple of conditional draft picks, both in this year's draft, a conditional 1st and a conditional 5th in the 2024 draft. Like I said, it kind of sounds like they didn't expect to make the playoffs. But last year, neither did the Preds, and they wound up playing really well at the end of the season and looking like they might. They had a possibility. Looked better at the end of the season and than they did before they made the trades. So the number 1 2024 pick becomes a 2nd round in 2024 if Carolina doesn't make the Stanley Cup final, and they only get the 5th round pick if Carolina wins the Stanley Cup. At the same time, Pittsburgh retains 25% of Gunsel's salary. I just kind of find the conditions interesting. You're listening to this show, then this type of thing would appeal to you. And if it doesn't, just wait. I'm only going to talk about it for a certain period of time. Okay, the Nashville Predators, they are 47-29-5. On the road, they are 24-13-3. Just as comparison, they are 24-13-3 on the road, and the Penguins are 22-14-4. You could argue the Nashville's a better road team than the Pens are a home team, but they both have winning records. The Preds are 5-5 in their last 10 games. Tonight's game is the entire road trip. They've been alternating home and away for the last 4 games, and this is the last game of that and the last game of in the regular season for the Preds. The Preds are 4th in the Central Division with 99 points, 6 points behind Colorado, Dallas on top with 111, and Winnipeg at 106, 1 point ahead of Colorado. Winnipeg has played 1 less game than Dallas, Colorado, and Nashville. The Preds are in the number 1 wild card spot, 3 points ahead of Vegas. They are 2 points ahead of LA in the 3rd spot in the Pacific. LA and Vegas both have 2 games left. So if the Preds get a point tonight, hopefully they get 2. They will sew up the first wild card spot. And it's pretty much certain they're going to play Vancouver. If the playoffs did start today, they would be matched up with Vancouver. The Canucks are 4 points behind Dallas, and the Canucks have 2 games to Dallas's 1 game remaining. Pacific's playoff order does look fairly set. They've got Vancouver on top, Edmonton 5 points behind with 3 games left. And then the Kings 5 points behind there with 2 games left. Vegas is 1 point behind LA, also with 2 games left. They could still swap positions. The Preds are in control of their destiny. If they win tonight, they will sew up the number 1 wildcard spot. I say that. Vegas could get to 100 points. Nashville does have the regulation win advantage over Vegas, 38-33. They currently have the advantage over LA, 38-37. So if LA loses and becomes a wild card team instead of the 3rd playoff spot, then they would not be improving the regulation win total. That could still be a toss up. The Preds need to win tonight to ensure that they are the number 1 wild card team. That would put them up against Vancouver instead of Dallas. In the Central, Winnipeg and Colorado are still trying to figure out who wants to have home ice advantage. But that's, the Preds are too far behind Colorado. 2 games remaining, 1 game remaining. They're 6 points back. So 1, 2, and 1. Who's going to be 1, 2? Who is 1 is set. Who's going to be 2 and 3 is set. It's just which team gets the spot. As far as potential playoff teams for the Predators against Dallas, which just looks unlikely for them to play Dallas, but they still could. They're 2-2. Both of the wins came on the road against Dallas, which is a good sign because Dallas would have home ice. It's unlikely for Nashville to have home ice at all unless somehow or another it comes down to Nashville and whoever is the 2nd wildcard spot, which is unlikely, not out of the realm. When the Kings won their first Stanley Cup, they started in the 8th spot, the 2nd wildcard spot, and they beat the 1st place, 2nd place, and 3rd place teams along the way to the Stanley Cup final. Against Vancouver, they are 0-3 against Vancouver. Not a good sign. They played 2 in Nashville and 1 in Vancouver. All of the games were early in the season. If you want a glimmer of optimism on that one, against Edmonton, 1-2, lost at home, and they're 1-1 in Edmonton. Again, playoff games are different. Looks they're it's going to be tough no matter who they play. But tonight, Nashville is in Pittsburgh to play the Penguins. It is the 2nd and final game with Pittsburgh, being the last game of the year, it would have to be. It is the only one in Pittsburgh. Home and home when they only play 2 games. It's a home and home. The Preds won the home game 3-2 back in November. For the Preds, it was the last game of a 6-game winning streak, and the loss for Pittsburgh was part of a 3-9 stretch that they had after a 5-game winning streak. So they didn't really meet Pittsburgh when Pittsburgh was at their best. Given where Pittsburgh is, I don't know if they had a good stretch to their season, but that's where they were at when we played them. As far as scoring, the Preds got 2 from McCarron in the first and held the Pens scoreless. So they got the first goal and they won the first period. Pittsburgh was the only team that scored in the second and third, getting 1 goal each, which took the game to overtime. And then Nashville got the game winner 14 seconds in overtime. So Preds got the first goal of the game. They won 2 periods, lost 2 periods, won the game. Pittsburgh has lost their last game against Detroit Saturday. Before that, they beat Detroit. They lost to Boston and beat Detroit. The Preds are on a 2-game winning streak. All right, so quick break. Maybe not so quick. Okay. When the Preds get the first goal of the game on the road, they're 19-5-1. 19-5-1 when they get the first goal of the game. When they do not, they're 5-8-2. And the first goal of the game has never been in the third period, has not been in the third period when they're on the road. By period, their record by period in the first, they're 17-9-14. Pretty good record. That's what I need to look into. 17-9-14. So they win 17 times, tie 14. Curious what happens on those 14 ties. Don't have that in front of me right now. The second period, not as good, 15-16-9. Those of you who have been frequent listeners of this podcast know that I started looking at these stats because I didn't think the Preds were a very good second period team. They call it a long change period. It's a long change if you're on defense because your team on offense is playing down in the area where your bench is. So if you're on a power play in the second period, it's easier to get your players on and off the ice, and so you can get fresh players on while the defenders have a harder time because they got so much further to go to get off the ice, especially to the defenseman that's on the far side from the bench. That's why it's called a long change. So 15-16-9 in the second, and then in the third, 14-14-12. Not kind of a toss-up, very even. So the only place that the Preds have an advantage overall on the road is in the first period. When they lose the first period, or when they lose the game in the first period, they're 4-6-6. So very even again. We'll get to this later. When the winning goal is scored. When they win, they're 13-3-8 in the first, 13-5-6, 13-1-10 in the third. Very good records in each period when they win. Consequently, when they lose, their record in the periods are not very good. The one that they're most even in is the first, and the second and third, 2-11-3, 1-13-2. So, things kind of look handwriting on the wall sort of thing. Not a bounce back type of team, although they have recently. This is stats from over 40 games through the year, which include the beginning of the year as well. But they did play well on the road at the beginning part of the year. Scoring by period. Overall, the Preds do have a 10-goal advantage in scoring in the first. It's fairly even. They are down 1 in the second and another 10-goal advantage in the third. That's overall. But on the road, in the first, it's a 16-goal advantage. So overall, 10, but on the road, 16, 43-27. In the second, the Preds still score 43 goals, but the opponents now score 46. In the third, it's even at 42-42. The Preds, I have not noticed that before. The Preds score on the road, have scored 43 goals in the first and second and 42 in the third. Very consistent. 1-3 in overtime on the road, as opposed to 6-5 over and all, and then 3-0 in shootouts. So overall and away. They haven't been in a shootout at home this season. So the winning goal per percentage. When does the winning goal get scored? The winning goal being, if the opponents score 1, when is the second goal scored? Overall, it looks kind of what you would expect. a third of the time, the second and third periods, 36 and 33%, and 14% in the first and overtime, 4% in the shootout. That's what you would expect. In general, again, on an overall basis, but when they lose, the call out here is 41% of the time the winning goal gets scored in the second period, as opposed to 32% for the Preds, 34 to 32, win or lose in the third. Everything looks very similar, 41% for the opponents versus 36. Now that's overall. On the road, the numbers change. The winning goal being scored in the first period goes from 14% to 10%, so it drops. It goes up to 40% in the second, stays at 33% in the third, 10% in overtime, and 8% in the shootout. So 10%, but the opposing team have not scored their winning goal in the first period on the road at all season. Period. Done. Dusted. 0%. 0% in the shootout. So 0 and 0. So where did all those percentage numbers go? Well, they all landed in the second period. 63% of the time, the opponents are going to have gotten on the road the winning goal in the second period. 19% in the third. Overall on the road, again, in the second period, it's 40%. The Predators, 25% in the second period, but 42% in the third, 33% overall there. I guess that's good. The numbers go up 17, 25, 42. Interesting, the shootout's higher than overtime, 13% in the shootout and 4% in overtime. And what I call my in-game statistics, what I was wondering about, as I vocalized a little bit earlier, I was looking at, overall the first period, the record is on the road 17, 9, and 14. And I'm like, well, what happened to those, 14 ties? They are 24, 13, and 3 on the road. Probably all the wins from winning the first period did not become wins for the games either. But, how do, and that's the first period, but say the third period. A couple of podcasts ago, I was positing on my podcast that they had lost the third period. And it's like, okay, so they lost the third period. What were they doing when they got to the third period? How were they performing? And so when they have a third period loss, it's fairly even. Going into the third, they were winning 10, losing 11, and they were tied 5. Of course, if you lose the third period and you're losing going into it, you're going to lose the game. And if you're tied, you're going to lose the game. So those 11 and 5 both become losses. If they're winning and they lose, they are 5, 4, and 1. So about 50-50. They were winning the game enough to lose the third period and still win the game, 50-50. At home, and this is where some of the numbers get a little interesting. At home, when they come into the third period and they lose it, at home they're 7, 2, and 3 coming in versus on the road 3, 9, and 2. So they lose the third period. They weren't doing very well. They were only winning 3 out of 14, not stellar. And then they're 1, 12, and 1. So the 3 games that they were winning become 1, 1, and 1. At home, it's 4 and 3 of the 7 times that they were winning, and they wound up losing the third period. So their situation going into the third period when they lose it, very different between home and away. That sort of thing that I think is kind of interesting to see. The third period tie, again, overall, a coin flip, 8, 7, and 8. If you're losing and you tie the third period, you lose. If you're winning and you tie the third period, you win. So it's the ties. And what happens in the ties? Well, in the ties, the Preds are 5-0-3. Pretty good. So overall, they come into the third period and they tie it 8, 7, and 8, 13, 7, and 3. So, that's not too bad. Again, a very stark difference. When they tie the third period at home, coming into it, 1, 7, and 3. On the road, 7, 0, and 5. So 7, 0, and 5. 7 times they were winning. No time were they losing. And 5 times they were tied. The ties were 3, 0, and 2. So their record in that situation is 10, 0, and 2. On the road, at home, 3, 7, and 1. A very stark difference to what happens when they tie the third period. So that's kind of an interesting data point. 14, 12 or 14. It's not 20 minimum of 20 for something to be statistically significant. It's starting to get in the range. All these particular situations in an 82-game season. It's tough to get 20 data points for any particular situation. So it's a trend. Interesting. When something's like 1, 7, and 3 versus 7, 0, and 5, give me a few more data points. I think it's going to go the same way. Maybe a little, might change a little bit differently, but there's definitely a skew going on between home and away. So that's the sort of things that I look at. Okay. Tonight, the Nashville Predators are playing the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Penguins are still in a fight for their playoff lives. At this point, they've got to believe. They play us tonight, and then they play the Islanders on Wednesday. The Islanders in the third spot. That's not really going to be a fight for third spot. They're trying to get into the second wildcard spot. So they are going to be playing as if their season depends on it, because guess what? It does. Hopefully the Predators can match their intensity and go beyond that, because they need to win as well. Okay, that's the show. Thanks for listening. I am Preston Proctor, and you've been listening to Predators Proclivity.